You know, not every troop in Clash Royale is meant to be a legend. Some are just there, dropped on the field, running straight into the madness, and gone 5 seconds later. No banners, no glory, no second chances, just a single drop of elixir and silence. Larry was supposed to be one of those, just another skeleton, one of a dozen popping out of a witch's spell, or scrambling out of a graveyard. Tiny bone swinging a sword way too big for his body, wobbling forward like he's got no idea where he's even going. Nobody cheering for him, nobody even noticing he was there at all. Half the time, Larry didn't even make it across the bridge, but for some reason, Larry wanted more. He looked around the battlefield, the towering golems, the mommy P.E.K.K.A.s, the hog riders sprinting past, smashing everything in their way. And he thought, what if I could be something too? It sounded crazy. Larry wasn't fast, he wasn't strong. Honestly, sometimes he tripped over his own feet just trying to take his first step. He didn't have armor, he didn't breathe fire, he didn't even have a shield like the guards did. All Larry had was a cracked sword and a dream. But you know what? He had something that a lot of troops, even the big ones, didn't have. He had heart. And in Clash Royale, sometimes heart is all you've got. Sometimes heart is enough to take you farther than anyone ever thought you could go. So tonight, forget the kings, forget the princess, forget the Mega Knight. Tonight, we're following Larry, the smallest troop, the forgotten one, the underdog nobody believed in. So sit back, relax, turn the volume up, and let's tell the story of the little skeleton who refused to stay buried. Every story has a beginning, and Larry's, it started with a spell. Somewhere deep inside the arena, in the middle of a messy battle between giants and musketeers, lightning bolts and fireballs, a lone witch raised her staff into the stormy sky. The ground rumbled, the air cracked, and with a flash of purple magic, 3 tiny figures burst out of the dirt. 3 skeletons, fresh, wobbly, confused. They blinked their hollow eyes, looked around, and did the only thing they were programmed to do: charge forward. Larry was one of them. At first, there wasn't much to set him apart. He was small, even for a skeleton. His sword was a little chipped. And somewhere during his very first few seconds of existence, he lost a piece of his jaw. It just kind of fell off. But Larry didn't notice. He was too busy doing what every skeleton does best, scrambling towards the nearest enemy like his non-existent life depended on it. Back at the witch's side, she watched her new summons with a faint smile. Witches didn't name their skeletons. They summoned dozens every match, sometimes hundreds. They didn't have time to get sentimental, but still, this one, the tiny one, who tripped over a pebble and face-planted 5 seconds after spawning, made her chuckle. Larry, she muttered to herself. You're Larry. And just like that, he had a name. Growing up, if you could call it that, wasn't easy for a skeleton. 1 minute you're summoned to a battlefield, the next you're flattened by a Valkyrie's spinning axe. There wasn't much time for friendships or dreams or second chances. But Larry found a way. He made friends with his fellow skellies, 2 other brothers who had popped up with him that day. They didn't have names, not yet anyway. Larry tried calling one of them Bonehead and the other Snappy, and they didn't seem to mind. Together they practiced swinging their swords, even though their arms sometimes popped out of their sockets mid-swing. They raced each other across the bridge, even though none of them were very good at running. And at night, when the battles ended and the arenas fell silent, they'd huddle by the riverbank and look up at the stars painted on the inside of the arena dome. Larry liked to dream. While Bonehead and Snappy roughhoused or play-fought with imaginary goblins, Larry would stare out across the battlefield and imagine himself doing something bigger. Maybe he could protect a tower. Maybe he could take down a giant. Maybe he could even one day make the crowd cheer. It sounded ridiculous. He was a skeleton. He was practically the definition of cannon fodder, but deep down, Larry believed he was meant for something more. Other troops didn't see it. When a golem stomped past during one training session, Larry called out to him, "Hey, one day you'll see me in action." The golem didn't even glance down, or if he did, it was hard to tell. Golems aren't exactly known for their expressive faces. Valkyries laughed when the skellies tried sparring against each other. The mini P.E.K.K.A.s barely noticed them underfoot. Even the archers, who were usually pretty friendly, shook their heads sympathetically when Larry talked about his dreams. "That's cute," one of them said, "but maybe aim a little lower, kiddo." But Larry didn't stop dreaming. There was one troop, though, who did believe in him: the witch. She didn't say much. Witches are mysterious like that. But sometimes when she summoned Larry and his brothers into battle, she would whisper, "Do your best, little ones." And every time she said it, Larry felt something spark in his chest. He wasn't just bones. He wasn't just a disposable troop to her. He mattered. Still, life wasn't easy. Larry's days were filled with quick defeats. Sometimes it was a fireball that incinerated him mid-charge. Sometimes it was an electro wizard that zapped him before he even touched the bridge. Sometimes it was just bad luck. But every time Larry crumbled into a pile of bones, every time his sword clattered to the ground, he thought about the witch's whisper, "Do your best." And the next time when the spell was cast and the skeletons rose again, Larry was right there, ready to try one more time. You see, Larry didn't measure his success by how many crowns he won. He measured it by how many steps he could take before falling, by how many swings he could make before getting knocked back, by how many moments he could create, moments where he mattered, even for a second. And sometimes he wondered if the arena itself was watching him. When the crowd roared after a clutch skeleton defense, when the king clapped his hands after a narrow win thanks to a little skeleton, when the witch gave him a little nod from across the field, Larry thought maybe, just maybe, he was on the right path. He wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the flashiest, but he had something even rarer: spirit. And in a world full of mega knights, lava hounds, and royal giants, sometimes the spirit was exactly what the arena needed most. Larry's first real battle was, well, a disaster. He didn't know it was going to be a battle at first. One moment, he and his skeleton brothers were chilling in the quiet corners of the arena, poking rocks with their swords, racing leaves floating in the river. And the next, wham! The witch slammed her staff into the ground, magic cracked the earth open, and Larry was summoned onto the battlefield with a poof of purple smoke. It was happening. It was finally happening. Larry's heart, or, well, the spot where a heart would be, raced. This was it, his moment, his big chance to prove himself, to show the entire arena that even a tiny skeleton could make a difference. Larry drew his sword, wobbled into a fighting stance, and charged. He didn't get far. About 3 steps into his heroic sprint, a log came rolling toward him. Not a metaphorical log, not a branch, a literal massive, angry-looking log with spikes hammered into it, spinning at a top speed across the bridge. Larry had a full second to stare at it in horror. Oh God. Then the log flattened him like a pancake. When Larry respawned back in the witch's platform, he was dizzy. One of his arms was on backward, his sword was bent into a weird shape. Bonehead patted him on the back. "First battles are tough, man," he said in a voice like 2 sticks rubbing together. Larry dusted himself off and tried not to feel discouraged. It had been a rough start, sure, but had been summoned again. That had to mean something, right? The next battle wasn't much better. This time, Larry made it across the bridge. Victory. Only to be sucked into a tornado and spun around like a piece of popcorn in the microwave. For what felt like an eternity, Larry twirled hopelessly through the air, sword flailing, bones clacking, occasionally letting out tiny yelps every time he bumped into another troop. When the tornado finally died down, he crashed unceremoniously into a princess tower and left exactly 1 scratch upon it. 1 tiny scratch, maybe 1 HP worth of damage. But to Larry, might as well have been a full-blown crown victory. He lay there in a heap, grinning up at the tower. "I did it," he whispered. And somewhere across the battlefield, he thought he heard the witch chuckle approvingly. Not every battle went well. Sometimes Larry got zapped by electro spirits. Sometimes he got squashed by a dark prince. One time, a Valkyrie twirled her axe at just the right moment and sent him flying like a baseball into the river. He floated for a while, face down, before a passing fisherman hooked him out and tossed him back onto the shore. But every now and then, Larry would get just close enough to matter. There was the time he distracted a charging prince for a full 2 seconds, just long enough for a mini P.E.K.K.A to sneak in and land a game-winning hit. There was the time when he and his brothers surrounded a musketeer, forcing her to fire in 3 different directions, letting the witch's skeleton army overrun the enemy's side. And then there was the first time, when Larry, all alone, scratched a crown tower for real. It wasn't much, it wasn't a lot of damage, but it was him, Larry, the tiniest troop, making a mark on the battlefield, even if it was just a tiny chip in the tower's armor. After that battle, when the witch gathered her troops back at the riverbank, she gave Larry a rare smile. "Good work, little one." Larry glowed. Bonehead and Snappy high-fived him, or at least they tried. Snappy's hand flew off mid-slap and landed in the river. Had to fish it out later. Even the biggest troops seemed to notice Larry now. A giant gave him a slow, respectful nod. A musketeer offered a playful salute. The king up in his tower pointed at Larry and shouted something that sounded suspiciously like "Nice hustle, Bone Kid." Larry felt 10 feet tall. Of course, not every battle was a fairy tale. The arena could be brutal. Sometimes Larry would charge valiantly toward a tower, only to get arrowed mid-stride. He'd sometimes try to sneak up on a magic archer, only to get lined up with 3 other troops and skewered in one shot. Sometimes he'd almost reach a crown tower, only for a last-second fireball to blast him into dust. Those moments hurt, not because of the damage, skeletons didn't really feel pain, but because every defeat chipped away a little at Larry's dream. Maybe I'm too small, he would think. Maybe the archers were right, maybe I should just stop trying. But every time that thought crept in, he would remember the witch's whisper. Do your best. Not win every battle, not destroy every tower, just do your best. And somehow, that was enough. Larry learned, little by little. He learned that charging straight at a tower isn't always the best plan. Sometimes it was smarter to distract. Sometimes it was better to cycle fast. Sometimes it was enough just to force the enemy to spend elixir dealing with you, so your teammates could land the real blows. Larry might not have had the biggest sword or the strongest armor or the loudest roar, but he had something most troops didn't: persistence. No matter how many times he got crushed, zapped, burned, or logged, Larry always got back up. There was one battle, one very special battle, that Larry would remember for the rest of his very fragile life. It was a fierce match. Both sides had towers at 1,000 HP, elixir was low, the clock was ticking down. Larry and his brothers were summoned at the last second, a desperate move by the witch. The enemy player panicked, spent his last bit of elixir dropping a defensive Tesla, but he mistimed it. Larry alone slipped past the Tesla's pull range. Step after step, he stumbled toward the crown tower. The king's eyes widened. The enemy player started frantically tapping cards that weren't ready yet, and then, whack. The sword hit the tower, minus 8 HP. The arena exploded in cheers. The king leapt out of his throne, fists pumping. The witch raised her staff high into the air. Even the opposing troops paused, blinking at the tiny skeleton who had just clinched the match. Larry looked up at the towering crown tower, at the confetti raining down from the sky, and the smiles on his teammates' faces. And for the first time in his life, he felt like a hero. After the battle, back by the riverbank, Larry sat with Bonehead and Snappy. He dipped his bony toes into the water, watched the reflections of the arena lights shimmering across the surface. He was small. He was fragile. He was just one little skeleton among hundreds. But tonight, he was Larry the Brave. And that was enough. It wasn't just Larry who started getting better. It was all the skeletons. Something was happening across the arenas. Something unexpected. Tiny troops that used to get wiped out without a second thought, the ones everyone treated like background noise, were starting to make a real difference. Players were starting to notice. The skeletons were rising. And for the first time in his short, bony life, Larry wasn't just tagging along for the ride. He was leading the way. It started with a few small changes. Skeletons had always been cheap. At 1 elixir, they were the easiest thing to toss down when you didn't know what else to do. Need to cycle? Skeletons. Need to distract? Skeletons. Need to panic spam something in front of your tower because you're out of elixir? Well, skeletons. Larry learned to use this to his advantage. If you were fast enough, smart enough, annoying enough, you could turn that one tiny second of distraction into a massive game changer. One day in a training match, Larry faced off against a knight. A real iron-armored knight. Big sword, big shield, heavy boots that could stomp a skeleton into powder. Larry should have been terrified. Instead, he grinned. He dashed left, faked right, then darted backward at the last second. The knight swung too early, missed completely, staggered forward. And just like that, Larry bought enough time for the witch's magic attack to slam into the knight and take him down. It was just a second, but in Clash Royale, sometimes a second is all it takes. Word spread fast among the witch's skeletons, then among the graveyard skellies. Then even the clan war veterans, the ones who'd seen everything, started whispering about it. Did you hear that little guy, the one missing part of his jaw? He's good. Of course, Larry didn't stop there. He trained harder than ever. When the goblins napped in the river and the Valkyries sharpened their axes, Larry was practicing, timing his charges, perfecting his dodges, learning how to split push. One skeleton distracting the left, two rushing on the right. At night under the pale arena moon, Larry would gather his brothers and drill them until their knees wobbled. Again, faster, smarter. And slowly, very slowly, the skeletons became a force to be reckoned with. It wasn't just Larry's imagination. Across the ladder, players started using skeletons more and more. Fast cycle decks, bait decks, chip decks, all of them realized something. For just one elixir, you could stall a giant, you could surround a mini P.E.K.K.A., you could even, if you timed it just right, stop a charging Dark Prince in his tracks. Larry's little crew wasn't a joke anymore. They were meta. One legendary day, a Grand Challenge champion used skeletons in his tournament-winning deck. When the news reached Larry, he almost dropped his sword out of sheer excitement. He could hardly believe it. We're important. Bonehead nodded, sagely. We've always been important, little dude. The world just finally caught up. Of course, it wasn't always smooth sailing. There were still battles where Larry got zapped to dust before he even crossed the river. Still matches where an angry Valkyrie spun into a tornado of steel and wiped out every Larry and his brothers in one swing. Still moments where he felt like nothing more than a speed bump for the enemy's tanks. But every defeat taught him something. Every setback sharpened his instincts. Larry learned that sometimes survival wasn't about charging forward. Sometimes it was about distracting. Sometimes it was about cycling. Sometimes it was about sacrificing yourself so your teammates could win the battle. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't flashy. It was quiet, selfless, smart. And Larry loved it. There was one match, one that Larry would never forget, that proved just how far he had come. It was a tight game, overtime, both towers barely standing. The enemy dropped a balloon, heavy, deadly, drifting toward the crown tower like a slow-moving meteor. The witch had no spells left, the archers were too far away. The king was already panicking, hammering every button on his remote. Everyone knew it was over. The balloon would reach the tower, it would drop its bomb. Game over. Unless Larry and his two brothers sprinted across the arena with everything they had. Their tiny bones clattered, their swords flailed, their helmets wobbled. The balloon hovered over the tower 1 second away. Half a second. Larry leaped. He didn't have muscles, he didn't have wings, but somehow he managed to scratch the balloon just enough. The balloon wobbled, it hesitated, it dropped just a little too early. The bomb exploded harmlessly on the battlefield. The crown tower lived. Larry landed in a heap at the foot of the tower, dazed, missing half his ribs, but alive and victorious. The king's shout echoed across the arena. Skeleton's MVP. Let's go. That night after the celebration, Larry stood on the bridge. The river below him sparkled in the moonlight. He thought about everything it had taken to get here. The log, the tornado, the countless times he'd been vaporized by Zap or stopped by a hog rider. All the moments when he thought he wasn't enough. And yet here he was, not just surviving, but thriving. Skeletons had risen from throwaway cards to strategic tools, from filler troops to real arena heroes. Larry smiled. Maybe he wasn't the biggest troop or the strongest or the fastest, but he had something no one could take away. He had soul. In the months that followed, skeletons became a staple of almost every serious deck. Fast cycle, skeletons. Cheap defense, skeletons. Need to stall a ram rider for one desperate second? Skellies. Larry and his brothers became beloved for their selfishness. Some called it luck, some called it strategy. Larry called it doing his job. Every battle he gave everything he had. Every battle he reminded the arenas and himself that even the smallest troop could leave the biggest impact. Sometimes at night, when the torches burned low and the arena was quiet, Larry would sit by the river and dream. He would imagine a world where skeletons weren't just background troops, where they stood shoulder to shoulder with the mighty legendaries, where they had statues built in their honor, where kids pointed at the battlefield and said, look at that skeleton go. He knew it was a silly dream, but then again, Larry had learned something important. In Clash Royale, even silly dreams could come true, if you kept fighting long enough. There are moments in every troop's life, moments so bright, so surreal, that you wonder if you're dreaming. For Larry, this was it. The golden age of skeletons. It didn't happen overnight, but it felt like it. One day, Larry was just another face in the crowd. The next, it was like if the whole arena had been painted in bone white. Everywhere he looked, skeletons. Flooding bridges, swarming towers, dancing around stunned knights and bewildered wizards. They weren't just filler anymore. They were the strategy. They were the stars. Larry could hardly believe it. The decks started popping up everywhere. Cycle decks, control decks, graveyard decks, bridge spam. It didn't matter what kind of player you were. If you wanted to win, you needed skeletons. Suddenly, Larry and his brothers weren't just tools. They were weapons. They were heroes. Larry would never forget the first time he heard it. Good game. Skeletons carried. It was shouted across the arena by a hog rider, tossing down his hammer in defeat. Larry, panting on the battlefield, missing part of his jawbone as always, just smiled. Carried. You liked the sound of that. And the festivals, oh, the festivals. The arena had never seen anything like it. Banners were hung from the towers, little white flags with tiny bone emblems. Confetti rained down made from shredded cards and old crown tower flags. Even the mighty princes trotted over to salute the skeletons. There was even talk, whispering among the wizards and golems, that the king himself had declared a new holiday, Skeleton Day. It wasn't official, of course. Kings never liked to admit when the small troops were winning the hearts of the people. But on that day, every year, you could feel it. The battles were lighter, players laughed more, golems wore funny hats, and everywhere Larry saw faces smiling at him, not through him. Life in the arenas was good. Larry and his brothers trained together every day. They practiced faster dodges, perfected their circle dance to confuse bigger troops, invented new ways to cling to enemy giants like burrs on a bear. They weren't getting stronger exactly. After all, you can only swing a tiny sword so hard. But they were getting smarter, quicker, craftier. Larry remembered one sparring match in particular. It was against a full-grown Valkyrie, spinning that massive axe of hers like a blender on legs. The old Larry, the clumsy one, would have run straight in and gotten flattened. But not this Larry. No. He and his two brothers split in 3 different directions. One distracted her from the left, one tickled her ankles on the right, and Larry timed it perfectly. He darted in just as she swung, missing him by a hair, and giving her a mighty bonk right on the shin. Sure, it didn't do much damage, but it mattered. The tower finished her off seconds later, and Larry threw his hands up in victory. He mattered. Back in the barracks, the skeletons celebrated every little win. Someone would sneak in a barrel of bone broth. They'd sit around tiny campfires made from broken arrows. They'd tell stories, real and exaggerated. Larry became a bit of a legend among them, the little skelly who could. The underdog who refused to stay down, even when the log rolled over him 5 times in one match. Even the witch started treating him differently. She used to summon skellies without a second thought, even without looking. Now, after every battle, she'd kneel down, brushing the dust off Larry's cracked skull and whisper, "Good job, little one." Larry beamed every time. One afternoon, something incredible happened. Larry's deck was used by a champion. Not just any player, a real Clash Royale champion at a tournament. Larry had heard of them before, of course. Players so good they could summon elixir with their minds, or at least It seemed that way. Players whose decks were studied like holy texts. And in this player's deck, alongside the mighty balloon, the fierce musketeer, the towering cannon, there it was. Skeletons. Larry. When he saw it, he cried. The golden age continued. For seasons and seasons, skeletons were at the top of the charts. Use rates through the roof, win rates solid, trophy counts climbing. Larry and his brothers started across the arena with pride now. No longer cannon fodder, no longer forgettable. They were essential. Even the cards they used to fear, Valkyrie, Wizard, Royal Ghost, even they showed some respect. The Royal Ghost, normally silent and aloof, floated past Larry one day and gave him a tiny nod. The Wizard, usually all fire and no manners, actually said well played after getting distracted by Larry long enough to lose a tower. It wasn't official, it wasn't recorded anywhere in the game stats, but Larry knew the arena had changed, and he had helped to change them. At night, after long battles and longer celebrations, Larry would sit on the edge of the barracks roof, legs dangling over the side. He'd look out across the sleeping arenas, past the towers, past the bridges, and smile. For once, the world didn't feel so big. For once, he didn't feel so small. Of course, in Clash Royale, nothing golden stays forever. Larry didn't know it yet, but change was coming. And not the kind that you could dodge with a clever sidestep. No, this would be the kind of change that hit harder than a Royal Giant's cannonball. The kind of change that even the bravest little skeleton couldn't avoid. But for now, for just one shining moment, Larry was on top of the world. And in his tiny, half-broken chest, his heart burned brighter than ever. For a long time, Larry thought the golden age would last forever. Every morning, the witch would summon him with a smile. Every battle, he and his brothers danced across the battlefield, weaving between giants, confusing princes, scratching towers for precious damage. It felt like the world had finally found a place for little skeletons. It felt right. But in Clash Royale, no meta stays the same. And for Larry, the winds of change were about to blow in colder than an ice wizard's breath. It started with whispers, first in the practice barracks, then between the healers and the guards at the King's Tower. Talk of a nerf. At first, Larry didn't believe it. Why would they nerf skeletons? They were balanced. They were beloved. They were part of the arena's soul. Sure, they were showing up in a lot of decks, but wasn't that a good thing? Wasn't that proof that they were important? Larry laughed it off with his brothers, clacking his bones together in a playful rhythm. Surely the players loved them too much to ever. And then, the day came. It was an ordinary Tuesday battle. Larry had just distracted a charging prince with a perfectly timed deployment. He even high-fived his brother mid-fight, a risky move, but hey, it was a good day. And then, right in the middle of the match, something strange happened. The familiar three little skeletons that usually burst onto the battlefield were only two. Larry blinked. Maybe the witch sneezed during the spell. Maybe it was just a one-time glitch. But then it happened again, and again, and again. No third skeleton, no full trio, just two. Just Larry and one brother. The battlefield suddenly felt so much bigger. Later that evening, the news was posted on the giant golden board at the center of the arena. Larry stood on his tiptoes, reading it aloud. Balance update. Skeletons now spawn 2 troops instead of 3. Larry's tiny sword clattered to the ground. He read it again and again. But no matter how many times he blinked, no matter how many times he hoped it was a typo, it wasn't. The golden age was over. The barracks that night were silent. No music, no clattering of bones, no playful sparring. Just a quiet, aching stillness. Larry sat in a corner, hugging his knees to his chest, trying to make himself feel smaller. Not that that was hard. He wasn't just missing another skelly beside him. He was missing part of himself. His trio, his family, had been broken. Battles became harder after that, much harder. 2 skeletons just couldn't do what 3 could. They couldn't distract a charging elite barbarian the same way. They couldn't surround a giant cleanly. They couldn't stall a Valkyrie long enough to save a tower. Players noticed, and players adapted. Slowly, quietly, skeletons began to disappear from decks, one by one, two by two, until entire matches went by without a single Larry stepping onto the battlefield. The once busy barracks, empty. The once proud parades, cancelled. The banners, torn and forgotten. It was like the world had moved on and left Larry behind. Some skeletons tried to stay positive. Some tried to hype each other up with chants. 2 is stronger, 2 is faster, 2 is better. But no one really believed it. Larry could see it in their eyes, the hollow way they swung their swords, the way they shuffled across the courtyard without energy. They weren't fooling anyone. They were mourning what they had lost, who they used to be. Larry took it the hardest. He blamed himself sometimes. Maybe he hadn't tried hard enough. Maybe he hadn't defended the arenas the way he should have. Maybe if he'd just been better, they wouldn't have needed to nerf him. Late at night, he'd sit on the same rooftop he used to sit during the good times. But now he didn't smile. He just stared at the stars and wondered if anyone even remembered the little skeleton who once scratched a tower for 1 HP. Of course, the arenas kept moving. They always did. New cards were released, new metas rose and fell. Champions strutted onto the battlefield, flashy and loud. The mighty evolved troops, stronger, faster, shinier, stole the spotlight. The players who once cheered for Larry, they cheered for evolutions now. And Larry was left in the dust. The witch, bless her heart, tried to keep him busy. She summoned him in casual matches. She sent him on small missions, distracting a lone miner here, sneaking past the distracted wizard there. But even she had to admit it wasn't the same. Larry could see it in her eyes every time he stumbled trying to take down a musketeer with only one brother by his side. A sadness, a quiet resignation. It wasn't his fault, but it wasn't enough. Worse still were the matches where the players forgot to summon him at all. They'd tap on the screen, hover over the skeleton card, then frown and pick something else instead. A better distraction, a better cycle card, something newer, something stronger. Larry knew he wasn't supposed to take it personally, but how could he not? Every match felt like a little goodbye. Sometimes Larry wondered if this was just it. Maybe he was destined to fade away, a relic of a different time, another forgotten troop in the vast Clash Royale graveyard, buried under piles of magic archer reworks and giant skeleton buffs. It hurt. More than the log, more than the fireball, more than all the tornadoes that ever flung him into the river. It hurt because it wasn't an enemy doing it. It was the players he loved, the ones he had fought for. But even in the darkest nights, Larry never truly gave up. How could he? Hope was stitched into his bones. The same stubborn little spark that made him run across the arena in the first place. Tripping, falling, getting back up, still burned inside of him. Even if no one else believed him, Larry still believed in himself. He trained in secret. Late at night when the arenas were asleep, he practiced faster dodges. He learned how to bait spells instead of just soaking them. He mastered the art of sneaking behind bigger pushes, nipping at towers when no one expected it. He didn't get stronger, he didn't get flashier, but he got smarter. He got tougher. And slowly, one match at a time, one scratch at a time, he started finding his place yet again. Not in the spotlight, not in the parade floats or the golden banners, but in the tiny cracks and crevices of battle, in the last-second distractions, and the unexpected blocks, the clever cycle plays that won games no one thought could be won. Some players noticed, the smart ones, the ones who understood that Clash Royale wasn't just about brute strength, it was about cleverness, grit, and timing. They smiled when they dropped 2 skeletons at just the right moment and watched a charging prince slam helplessly into them. They laughed when Larry distracted a mini P.E.K.K.A. long enough for a miner to chip down the tower. They appreciated the little things, and slowly, very slowly, Larry started finding a new kind of respect. A quieter respect, but a deeper one. He wasn't the star anymore. He wasn't the centerpiece of top meta decks, but he was something even better. Reliable, trusted, and essential. The golden age was gone, but a new era was dawning. An era where Larry didn't need parades or holidays to matter. He mattered because he kept showing up. He mattered because he never stopped trying. He mattered because in a game full of champions and dragons and legendary warriors, sometimes all you need is a little skeleton with a big heart. For a while, Larry lived in the quiet spaces, the little moments of a battle that nobody really noticed. A skeleton soaking up one shot from a dark prince, a cheap cycle to get back to a better card faster. Small victories, hidden contributions, no parades, no fireworks. But Larry had made peace with it. He had stopped hoping for a grand return. He fought because it was what he did, because it was who he was, and sometimes that's enough. But fate, it seems, wasn't done with him yet. It started the way so many things in the arena start, with a whisper. Players on the ladder began noticing something small, something sneaky, something familiar. Skeletons, the humble, two-boned distraction, were winning matches again. Not because they were flashy, not because they were broken, because they were smart, because they were cheap. Because in a game growing more expensive by the update, with 5, 6, and even 8 elixir cards dominating decks, and 1 elixir skeleton card was pure gold. Pros started to take notice. They began adding skeletons back into their tournament decks, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Top players whispered about it. Skeletons are cracked right now. 1 elixir for this much value. Insane. Larry felt it. He felt it in the way he was summoned more confidently, the way players trusted him again. Not just thrown away as a distraction, but carefully deployed. Timely. Strategic. Important. For the first time in a long time, Larry wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. It helped, of course, that balance changes eventually came swinging back in his favor. Not huge buffs, just little nudges, tiny tweaks. But for a troop as small as Larry, even tiny things make a big difference. One day, something amazing happened. Something Larry never thought he'd see again. He was summoned, and people cheered. Real players, real arenas, cheering for a skeleton, cheering for him. It wasn't the same kind of wild parade from the Golden Age. It was different, more mature, more meaningful. It was respect. The kind you earn not by being flashy, but by being dependable. Larry fought harder than ever. He learned from the bigger troops, hog riders, valkyries, even musketeers. He watched how they moved, how they thought, how they stayed calm under pressure. And he added all of it to his tiny arsenal. He might not have had the muscles, he might not have had the armor, but he had a sharp mind and a heart that refused to quit. One of Larry's proudest days came in a match against the champion, a mighty golden knight with armor that gleamed like the sun itself, charged toward the tower with terrifying speed. Players gasped. The tower was low. Victory was within the golden knight's grasp. But just as he lowered his lance for one final devastating blow, Larry stepped in. One tiny skeleton, one tiny sword, standing in the path of a whirlwind of death. The Golden Knight's charge fizzled. The tower survived. And somewhere out there, the player controlling that deck whispered, "Thanks, Larry." Larry became a kind of quiet legend. In the high ranks, the pros understood his worth. They spoke of him with reverence. You can't build a good cycle deck without skellies. Skeletons are the best 1 elixir you can spend. Larry didn't need a crown. He didn't need a throne. He had something better. He had trust. Then came the Evo era. Evolution troops, buffed up versions of classic cards, started bursting into the arena, bigger, stronger, flashier. It would have been easy for Larry to feel left behind yet again. After all, evolved skellies existed now, tougher with a built-in shield, cooler, newer, the kind of thing players gravitated towards. Larry watched them in fights sometimes. The Evo skellies were impressive, no doubt about it. He even cheered for them from the sidelines. They were family, after all, even if he wasn't one of them. But here's the thing. Not every battle needs a flashy soldier. Sometimes you just need someone who shows up. Someone cheap, someone reliable, someone you can trust when you're low on elixir, when your tower's at 500 HP, when a giant skeleton is lumbering toward you, and you have to cycle back to your cannon fast. In those moments, you don't need evolution. You just need Larry. He fought side by side with the evolved troops. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't bitter. He was proud. Proud to be a part of the team. Proud to play his part, even if it was small. Because that's what real heroes do. They don't need the spotlight. They just need the mission. In high ladder matches, Larry's new nickname was the MVP nobody talks about. In tournaments, commentators smiled when a clutch skeleton pulled off a save for a tower. In casual games, players remembered how satisfying it was to block a mini P.E.K.K.A with a single skelly at just the right time. Larry's reputation grew, quietly, steadily, relentlessly, just like him. But Larry's true victory wasn't in the matches he won. It wasn't in the towers he saved. It wasn't even in the players he helped climb the ladder. Larry's true victory was internal. It was the knowledge that no matter how many nerfs came, no matter how many meta shifts or balance changes or flashy cards were released, he had survived. He had endured. There was a lesson hidden inside those tiny bones, a message for anyone who cared to see it. You don't have to be the biggest. You don't have to be the strongest. You don't have to be the newest or the flashiest. You just have to keep showing up. Keep trying. Keep believing. And Larry, he never stopped, even after all the heartbreak, even after being forgotten, even after watching his brothers fade into the background. He never stopped. Sometimes players joke that skeletons have infinite lives, and maybe that's true. But the real magic, the real secret, is that Larry never needed extra lives. He only needed one, and he used it better than anyone else ever could. Today, when you watch a Clash Royale match, whether it's a sweaty grand challenge or a casual ladder grind, you might miss it if you blink. You might not even realize it happened. But somewhere in that battle, somewhere in the chaos, a little skeleton steps onto the battlefield. He dodges a log, he distracts a giant, he absorbs a lightning spell with a grin. And just for a moment, the world tips ever so slightly in his team's favor. Not because he's powerful, but because he's there. Because he cares. Because even the smallest troop can make the biggest difference. Larry came back, not with a roar, not with a thunderous charge, but with a quiet step, a small swing of his sword, and a heart full of hope. He may not win every battle, he may not be in every deck, but he's part of Clash Royale's soul now, forever. And somewhere deep inside the arena, where the shadows stretch long and the towers shine bright, Larry sharpens his tiny sword, straightens his helmet, well, it may just be a cracked skull, but still, and gets ready for the next battle, for the next chance. Because that's what Larry does. That's what heroes do. You know, when a Clash Royale match ends, when the elixir dries up, when the towers crumble or stand tall, something quiet happens. The battlefield falls still, the roar of hog riders fades, the thunderous fists of golems go silent. The arrows stop flying, and if you listen closely, really listen, you might hear it. The soft clatter of tiny bones. Just a little skeleton brushing the dust off his sword, adjusting a helmet that's way too big, looking around the silent arena with wide, curious eyes. Maybe he's won, maybe he's lost. Maybe no one even noticed he was there. But Larry is smiling anyway. Because he knows something a lot of us forget. It's not about being the biggest. It's not about being the strongest, the flashiest, the scariest. It's about showing up. Every battle, every challenge. Every time someone taps that one elixir card without a second thought, trusting him to do something. It's about heart. And Larry has more heart than troops 3 times his size. Maybe that's why he's still here, after all the patches, all the balance changes, and all the power creep, all the shifts in the meta. Larry never left. He just kept moving forward, one tiny step at a time. And there's magic in that. Not the magic of wizards or witches or sparking towers. A different kind of magic. The kind that happens when you don't give up, even when nobody's watching. The kind that turns the smallest, humblest troop into something unforgettable. The kind that reminds us that even in a world full of dragons and princes and massive elixir golems, a single skeleton can still matter. When the match starts, players don't think about it much. They're building decks, they're cycling cards, they're pushing trophies. It's just a 1 elixir card. It's just Larry, right? But when that musketeer locks onto your tower, when that miner sneaks behind enemy lines, when that balloon is just a few seconds away from ending everything, Larry is there, dashing out into danger without a second thought, distracting, delaying, saving the day in the smallest but most important way. And every time it happens, every time that little skeleton saves you with 1 more second, buys you one more attack, wins you one more game, maybe, just maybe, you're seeing a glimpse of something bigger, something braver, something timeless. Larry isn't flashy. He doesn't swing a giant axe like the lumberjack. He doesn't summon earthquakes like the earthquake spell. He doesn't spawn from some grand glowing portal. He just walks forward with his tiny little legs, with a sword that is way too big for him, facing enemies 100 times his size, and never once hesitating. And maybe that's why deep down players keep putting him in their decks. Not because they expect miracles, but because they believe in the little guy. The one who keeps fighting when nobody expects him to win. The one who never complains, never quits, never needs a spotlight to do his job. The one who reminds us that sometimes heart is more important than strength. Larry's story isn't about fame. It's not about trophies. It's not about nerfs or buffs or OP metas. It's about hope. The kind of hope that says maybe I'm small, maybe I'm fragile, maybe I get hit by the log 5 seconds into every match, but I'm still here. And I'm not done yet. So every time you tap that card, every time you summon that lone skeleton onto the field, you're not just playing a troop. You're continuing a story. The story of a tiny, fearless dreamer. The story of Larry. Maybe somewhere deep in the digital code of Clash Royale, Larry knows it too. Maybe he feels it every time he lands that one last tap on a tower. Maybe he smiles, remembering all the times he was forgotten, laughed at, nerfed, pushed aside, and all the times he came back anyway. Maybe, just maybe, he knows he's a part of something bigger now. Something eternal, something legendary. Not because of strength, not because of fame, but because of loyalty, because of persistence, because of heart. And so, dear player, next time you're in the heat of battle, next time everything seems lost, next time you're out of elixir, out of time, and out of options, remember Larry. The smallest troop, the one who always shows up when you need him most. Because in Clash Royale, just like in life, sometimes the smallest heroes make the biggest difference. And somewhere out there, in the dusty corners of the arena, between the towering royal giants and the blazing inferno dragons, a tiny skeleton sharpens his sword, straightens his cracked skull, and waits for one more match, one more battle, one more adventure. Because Larry's not done yet. And neither are you.